Hi, everybody. We're going to wait just 1 or 2 minutes to let everybody get settled here. Meantime, we will welcome you to the mid-year MIPS checkup. Always important to get our checkups, and MIPS is no different. So we welcome you here. We're just going to give it 1 more minute. Let everybody get joined, get settled before we go ahead and get started. And as you're getting settled, I'll start by saying that this is hosted by clinical quality experts. Clinical quality experts is part of Eye Care Leaders. Provide EHR. Eye Care Leaders provides EHR and practice management technologies for optometry and ophthalmology practices. Of course, clinical quality experts, our friends there, offer absolute expertise in all things MIPS, and you'll see that for yourself in a few minutes. So it is 2 after the hour. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's presentation, the mid-year MIPS checkup. My name is Nicholas Peddle. I am the Vice President of Marketing for Eye Care Leaders. I'm joined today by Katie Buchholz, who's the Director of Business Development. Oh, there we go. The slide magically changed. So Katie has worked with MIPS since its inception, and she spent about a decade even prior to that working with regulatory, the preceding regulatory and quality programs. She also had 10 years prior to that of clinical experience, and I believe she sold musical instruments before then, and is a musician as well. So her
Yes.
hidden talents. I will now. I'm happy to turn it over to. Well, before one more housekeeping thing. I'm sorry. We want this to be interactive. We want to hear your questions. So if you could type your questions, you can type them throughout, and we'll address them at the end. And we will send a recording after and the Q&A there. Now I'll officially hand it over to Katie. So thank you everybody for joining. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. And thanks for that kind introduction. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It's hard to believe that it's already the middle of May. So it feels like we just got done reporting, and now we're talking about reporting for 2024. So as we're progressing through 2024, we're kind of going to do a mid-year MIPS checkup. And these are just some things to keep in mind as the year is progressing here. So for our agenda today, we've got a brief overview just to kind of do a little refresher if anyone is unfamiliar with MIPS. This will be a kind of a very, very high level overview of what it entails. We'll also talk about how to report 2024 MIPS in about 6 steps, and we'll talk about where we are on that journey. And then we'll get into some details here, and these will be some tips and tricks to just kind of check the pulse, if you will, of how your performance is doing for 2024. And then we'll go into how our team can help you. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So no need to just keep your questions in your mind until the end. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll address them after the webinar's all done. All right, so let's go into our little brief overview here first. So what is MIPS? Now it's, as you know, with all things regulatory, there are a billion different acronyms out there, but this one stands for the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. Now it's basically one of 2 tracks within the quality payment program. When MIPS was started kind of in 2017, it began to encompass the older programs such as PQRS, Meaningful Use, Value-Based Modifier Program, and then just for fun, the addition of improvement activities. So it's been on a ramp up, what are called the transition years, for the first 5 years of the program, but now we're into how the program was originally intended to function by CMS. So how it works is basically if a clinician qualifies to report MIPS in 2024, that clinician's going to receive a performance-based payment adjustment in 2026 that is based on the 2024 performance. And then there's basically, you kind of play the game here in like 4 different categories. Each category has its own set of rules and predetermined weights in the final score that you'll receive. But the 4 categories of MIPS is quality, cost, promoting interoperability, and improvement activities. And we'll go over today, like I said, some mid-year checkups on each of these categories, so things to keep in mind, and then also a few other general things to keep in mind about MIPS for 2024. Okay, so kind of going over MIPS, continuing that high-level overview, let's talk about scoring. So scoring is based on 0 to 100 points, all right? So for 2024, your performance threshold is 75. A 75 equals a neutral payment adjustment in 2026. If you score over 75, you will get a positive payment adjustment. And then if you score below 75, it equals a negative payment adjustment. Now, these payment adjustments are applied to all Medicare Part B covered professional service payments for 2026. And that's for the entire year. So that can, depending on how many Medicare patients you serve, that can be a lot of money. So it's important to pay attention to MIPS and your final scores. If you receive a negative payment adjustment, you can receive up to a -9%, a negative payment adjustment of up to 9% on your Medicare Part B covered professional service payments. On the plus side, if you get a positive payment adjustment, that depending on how many people do well on their MIPS, you can score very well. And the negative payment adjustment receivers, their money is funneled toward the positive payment adjustment receivers. So it's a budget neutral program, which if there's more negative payment receivers, there's more money in the positive payment adjustment area. So, all right, so here's kind of the journey that we have for MIPS 2024. This is our 6-step process here. We've already gone through steps 1 through 3. If you haven't, you can still go back and do them. And I would definitely recommend that. You can also reach out to our teams, clinical quality experts, and we can help you with these things as well. So right at the moment, we're thinking, all right, we've checked our preliminary eligibility, so we know who is initially on slate to report for 2024. We've hopefully already planned our reporting options. And so such as, all right, we're going to report our quality category using a registry, or we're going to report our quality category using claims. And then we'll choose our participation options. All right, we're going to put everybody, all physicians in this clinic in one group, or we're going to report our physicians individually. So right at the moment, we're at that step 4 stage, which is perform and track activities and measures. We'll be continuing this through the end of the year, of course. And then in December, we receive our final eligibility. This is where CMS says, okay, this is absolutely who is eligible to report with your clinic, with your tax ID number. And then in step 6 here, which is the early part of next year, you're submitting your data for those clinicians who are who have final eligibility requirements to report MIPS. Now, I have a little asterisk at the end of the Submit 2024 data because as we saw this year, deadlines can change throughout the year. So if you're reviewing this webinar maybe a little later in the year, please check the Quality Payment Program website to make sure that there haven't been any changes in the dates. That's very important because those things change all the time. All right. So let's start to get into a little bit of the things that we need to keep in mind for 2024, especially right about now. So one thing to keep in mind as your year progresses is to monitor your physician onboarding and departures. So this is how eligibility is determined for 2024. So Medicare looks at how a clinician bills and with whom they bill for segment 1, and that's October 1st, 2022. Now keep in mind, this is for 2024. So we're going all the way back to October 1st, 2022. And it's the billing that occurred from that date to September 30th, 2023. So last year, September. Now that information is available now. You can go to the Quality Payment Program website and look up your clinician's NPIs and see where you're sitting. And that's a great thing to do because that gives you a kind of a starting point. It gives you an idea of, okay, this is what we can somewhat predict who will need to report for 2024. Here comes the tricky part. The segment 2 of eligibility is in progress. So that deals with billing that was done from October 1st of last year through September 30th of this year. And then what happens is that those two segments are reconciled by CMS, and then it's posted as final eligibility sometime in December of 2024. So if you're reading this, you're kind of starting to see, wow, if a physician joins or departs during this segment 2 process, you won't know if they're eligible to report with your clinic until December of this year. So one of the things you have to do throughout the year is watch physicians who are coming in and leaving. Because if a new physician starts billing Medicare Part B services under a new tax ID number, they may not appear eligible to report right now because they weren't with the clinic from October 1st of 2022 to September 30th, 2023. But then all of a sudden, come the end of this performance year, you see that, oh my goodness, this physician is eligible to report. And so you need to incorporate that new physician's data into your MIPS plans as soon as you know what's happening. So that way, if they are eligible to report with your group, great, okay, you'll be all prepared for that. And if not, that's super, you'll just remove their data from your reports. But it's better to plan to report for those new physicians than to be caught unawares come December. All right, so let's go into our 4 categories of MIPS here. The first category we'll discuss about mid-year checkups is benchmarks. Now, here's something interesting. So each quality measure is judged against past historical data that Medicare has received. And each measure is worth a set number of points. Now, when you're going for your quality reporting, you want a total of 60 points. You report on 6 measures. You can report on more, but CMS will score you according to your 6 highest. Now, what you want to do is you want those 6 measures to get you as close to 10 points each as possible. So what you want to do is watch your benchmarks. Now this is, you can go to the resource library on the Quality Payment Program, and you can download these benchmarks. And they also change throughout the year and without any notification. So if you're going to look at benchmarks, make sure that you just download the latest version just to be safe. So quality measures are scored against the benchmark, which means they can be worth up to 10 points. And a measure has to meet these three criteria. You have to have 75% data completeness, which means 75% of the patients who qualify for that measure need to be reported and included in the measure if you're reporting to CMS. The measure has to also meet a case minimum criteria, and that's generally 20 cases. And then a benchmark has to exist for the measure's collection type, which means there's historical data as well. So if a measure doesn't meet data completeness, even if a benchmark exists, that measure suddenly reduces to 0 points. If the measure's submitted by a small practice, which is 15 physicians or fewer, the small practice can earn 3 points that don't meet data completeness criteria. But at that point, I would try to find another measure that's worth 10 points, because you report 6 measures, you want your measures to be worth 10 points each. All right. So we saw earlier, that the measures that don't meet case minimum aren't eligible for scoring against benchmark. And then also too, I wanted to look at the timing of measures. So the quality measures are they're in a they have a pattern of being phased in and performed and then phased out. So the benchmarks and the points that the measures are worth will reflect where the measure is in its life cycle. So one of the things that's kind of cool is that look for newer measures that could apply to your practice. Because if a measure is in its first or second year of the program, those measures can earn 7 or 5 points respectively if data completeness is met. This doesn't apply to claims measures. So if you're working with a registry and you see a newer measure available, look into it, because even if you're having trouble meeting data completeness, you can still earn a good score from certain measures if they're newer in their life cycle. If they're towards the end of the life cycle, you'll start to see on your benchmarks, and we'll see a more expanded view here in a second, you'll start to see a couple of phrases. One of them is topped out and one is a 7-point cap. So if you see these, it means that for that measure, it's getting towards the end of its life cycle. So if you see that a measure is topped out, but does not have the 7-point cap, what that means is that performance rates have been really high and there's no real meaningful performance improvements that have been observed for at least 2 years. The measure can still earn 10 points, but it's going to be difficult. If you see topped out yes and 7-point cap yes, that means it's been topped out for at least 2 consecutive years, and you cannot earn more than 7 points for this measure. So here's an example of benchmarks here. And if you're looking at this, you feel free to take a picture with your cell phone, or refer to this page when you receive a copy of the webinar. But if you go to this website and you download the latest benchmarks, make sure you review the version history to make sure that you get the latest information changes. But what we're going to do is look at a couple of examples of some measures and how the points work. So if I were looking at these 3 measures and I had to pick one, I would likely pick the top one, because if you see where it says decile, that's the number of points that you would get for percentage performance that appears beneath it. So let's say you're scoring an 85% on on this measure, then you would get 7 points from the measure. However, if you're scoring 95%, then you're going to get 10 points for the measure. The second option here is where this measure's starting to end its life cycle. It's starting to be topped out. There's no 7-point cap, but if you score a 95, which sounds pretty good, you're only getting 5 points for the measure. So you have to be strategic in the measures that you choose. Now, the last one here, man, if it's a last ditch, you need some kind of measure to report, you can look at this one. But if you see 7-point cap, even if you see 100 under the decile 10 spot, you're only going to get 7 points for the measure. So you kind of have to strategically choose your measures and not necessarily pick ones that you've always done, but just do a reassessment, especially throughout the year when benchmarks change. All right, so here's just a few tips, especially a lot of our viewers today will use a clinical data registry to track and report their quality measures. So just a few things. Dashboards are starting to be available now. And so review your numerators and denominators for your chosen measures. Just go through, make sure it makes sense. Patients, like there's not duplicate patients. You're not like, if you're a cataract surgeon and your dashboard's updated through the end of April, and you only have 2 patients in the cataract surgery denominator, I mean, those are kind of some logical things that might raise some questions. It's important to identify and correct errors early. I mean, whether it's a workflow issue in clinic, a lot of places have some high employee turnover. And so retrain as soon as possible. Or if it's a software issue, either on the vendor side or the registry side or the EHR side, get it corrected early. Also, figure out your registry's internal deadlines for cases and changes, and mark your calendar, because a lot of registries will have, okay, you need to have all cases in by October 1st or something like that. That's a random date. But you want to make sure that you're being kind of a good registry citizen by abiding by the internal deadlines. Also double check that all possible MIPS eligible clinicians and locations are included on your dashboard. This is especially important if you have physicians who are coming on board sometime this year. And basically hold everyone accountable. If you're, take documentation. It's not that just be cautious that, like, okay, we did say this that we needed, you needed a screenshot here, but just wanted to follow up, make sure there's nothing that fell through the cracks, hold people accountable, and also keep documentation, because it helps if there's confusion that occurs later on. And then also be extra careful if switching EHR software companies or you have a high staff turnover. It's because it leaves a lot of room for possible errors and possible data gaps. And that can really, really mess up your score come the end of the year. All right, so we'll move to the cost category. This one, if you go in, double check and make sure that you don't have any random applicable measures that are applying to you for this year. When you find your measures, research them. If you need help understanding them, reach out to us. And then I would recommend spot checking some patients who fall under the parameters of your cost category measures, and just spot check it. Judge it according to the rules that CMS lays out. And this is especially important if you have new folks on your team. Sometimes knowledge gets passed, but it might not be accurate knowledge, or it might not be up to date during the training process. So just make those corrections as soon as possible so you can get the scores, the higher scores. And then also watch your referral partners. Referral partners can play a bigger part in your cost category score than you realize. A lot of measures, especially the episodic cost measures, have a time span window. And if you have referral partners who are submitting certain billing codes during those time span windows, they can affect your performance on the measure. So just go in, follow those steps, and like I said, if you need some help, need some extra set of eyes, just give us a shout. All right, now here's promoting interoperability. This little category seems to have received the biggest changes for 2024. It always seems like there's one category that gets the attention for a performance year, and this year it seems to be promoting interoperability. All right, so things to keep in mind. The reporting period is now 180 days. It has to be continuous. And there's no more 90-day reporting periods for this category. So a couple of things that this means. This means your last 180-day performance period begins in less than 2 months, on July 5th, 2024. So right now is the time to be checking your numbers and practicing, and making sure that you're set to go as soon as July 5th hits, if you're waiting for promoting interoperability. Also check your EHR for certified, for their what we call CERT functionality. It stands for Certified Electronic Health Record Technology. You have to have a certain certification criteria for your software if you're going to report promoting interoperability. That functionality has to be in place by the first day of your chosen performance period. So as an example, if July 5th is your starting date for your report, the certification functionality has to be in place by that date. And then your EHR has to be certified to that level by the last date of your performance period. So they have to be certified with the national organization and have it on record that they are certified by the end of the performance period. So functionality has to be there, but the name has to be there on the ONC website at the end. All right. Also, what this means is that you need to look at your measures. There have been a lot of point shifts for 2024, and a lot of new exclusions and options. So as an example, let's talk about query of PDMP. So this is where you have to query your particular state's PDMP. And so you'll see those little 2 side points. So this was just taken from the promoting interoperability materials. So let's go with option 2 here first. So, option 1. So look at your exclusions, okay? Different states have different integrations with software. See what your state has. Also, too, different states have different funding available if it's going to be cost prohibitive to sync up with their PDMP. If you do prescribe during your performance period, so that 180 days that you choose, if you do prescribe any Schedule 2 opioids or Schedule 3 or 4 drugs during that performance period, you have to show that you queried the PDMP. So just go through and see what the changes are. If you need some assistance with like staying on top of the changes, clinical quality experts, we stay on top of those changes and basically try to give you some peace of mind so that way you don't have to fuss with it, you don't have to worry about it. So also too, when you go, I would recommend reviewing the PDFs from the quality payment program for all of the measures. If you go to the website that's listed, select Performance Year 2024, and then you click on Explore Measures, read the measures through in their entirety, because what you'll see is that, all right, well, going back to that query of PDMP, if we have an exclusion that applies, let's say our clinicians don't electronically prescribe these types of medications, well, then what happens to the 10 points that the measure is worth? When you go into the measure definitions, it will tell you, okay, if you can exclude, these 10 points are going to go to e-prescribing. And then that makes your e-prescribing worth 20 points possible. So it's just important to read the measures, and that way you'll know your capabilities, your limitations, and it's going to save your score. All right, also promoting interoperability. So for the past couple of years, we've heard about the SAFER guides, and basically when you reported your data, it was, you could technically say, no, I didn't do this, and you would get credit for satisfying the requirement for the year. To satisfy the requirement for this year, you have to do the first part of the what are called the SAFER guides, and there's a link to the SAFER guides here, because you have to complete a self-assessment and detailed worksheets for what are called the high priority practices. It's the first of the 9 sections in these little guides. And to report promoting interoperability for MIPS, it requires a yes response on this little segment of the SAFER guides. And then also too, don't forget everybody's favorite security risk assessment. I've included the link to that tool here as well. Both of these need to be done before the end of 2024. Get them out of the way now if you can. You know, it's mid-year, it's a good time. December 31st, not fun to do these. And so let's see here. Let's see, I'm gonna go here. All right, and then last part of promoting interoperability, make sure you keep an eye on if you are in the teens of physicians. So like, let's say you have 13 physicians and you're going to be onboarding a few more this year. Really pay attention to crossing the small to large practice threshold. Because once you move from 15 providers to 16 providers, you can no longer receive an automatic exclusion from promoting interoperability. So remember how that eligibility period, the second period, was from October 1st of 2023, and then it ended on September 30th, 2024. CMS is going to look at your number of physicians during that time, and if you suddenly transition from a small group to a large group, you're going to be required to perform the large group promoting interoperability. All right, so let's move to improvement activities here. Make a wise use of time and effort. Just go ahead and get them out of the way now. This one is the shortest performance period of all the categories. It's a minimum 90-day period. If you're part of a group, you have to have 50% provider participation. Each activity must be performed during 2024, but multiple activities, let's just say you're doing more than one, they don't have to be performed during the same periods. Again, like what we just said about watch your small practice to large practice threshold. If you are moving from 15 physicians to 16 physicians before September 30th, then you will be required to perform basically double the amount of improvement activities that you were required to as a small practice. And then also remember that your exceptions can cause separate, like when you move to a different small practice to a large practice, the exceptions that you file could separate your weight, could require separate reweighting provisions. So if you, we'll go into that in a little bit more in a second here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so your 4 categories of MIPS: quality, cost, promoting interoperability, improvement activities. Those make up your final score, right? Well, each of those categories pulls a different weight in your final score. So you can use that to your advantage to strategically plan how you're going to report. And it's best to figure out your options rather than be surprised by them later. So remember, small practices have the option to either include and report promoting interoperability or automatically exclude from promoting interoperability. And then if that happens, your category weights will shift around. Also too, if you file a hardship, that will also cause different reweighting provisions from small practices to large practices. So here's an example. So speaking of category reweights, here are some options to consider. So at the top here, you'll see the traditional weights for 2024. Standard weighting, you don't have, you're reporting all 4 categories. So you'll see quality and cost are both at 30%. Improvement activities is 15% of your final score. Promoting interoperability is 25%. Now, let's take the same situation, same situation, but apply it to a small group and then a large group. So our situation is we are going to exclude, as a small clinic, from promoting interoperability, and we don't have any cost measures that apply to us. What does that do? Well, that reweights the other two categories of quality and improvement activities. They each become worth 50% of your final score. So let's say you score perfectly in your quality category and you score perfectly in your improvement activities, you'll get a 100. Now, let's say we have that same scenario where we filed a hardship for promoting interoperability and cost. So now we're left with reporting quality and improvement activities. So unlike the small clinic, who gets a 50-50 split on those, for a large group, that becomes 85% of a weight for quality and 15% for improvement activities. So like, let's say so this helps you in kind of planning out, okay, how are we doing? What do we need to focus on in order to make the best use of our efforts? And you can address those scenarios accordingly. Other things to consider when you're looking at your category reweights. Just know your options that are available to you. The exception applications for the hardships, they're available now for submission, where you can fill it out and submit it. Right at the moment, that closes at 8 p.m. Eastern on December 31st, 2024. Those dates sometimes fluctuate, but just plan on having it in by December 31st if you have something that applies. I would go to the resource library, and you'll see the link here in the lower left, and download the application guides, because it'll tell you what you're allowed to file a hardship for and what you're not allowed. Like as an example, there are no more COVID-19 exceptions. So that is gone. That is a thing of the past. And then also to look at the hardship exception guides and make sure that you can prove why you requested the hardship. Because in case of an audit, you will want to have that validation proof that, yes, we qualified for this hardship because of this. So that's a really good resource. Also too, mid-year checkup. If you are considering switching EHRs, our team has worked with the iMedicware platform, and we've created an ebook download. It's free, and the link is up on the screen here. There are certain timings that you need to keep in mind if you're switching EHR vendors, and timing is important during a MIPS performance year. Sometimes it puts extra burden, like if you switch at the end of the year, it can really put an extra burden on the registry, depending on what rules they have for like for continuing their data processing for you. You'll also want to consider, okay, we have to report promoting interoperability. Let's make sure our staff is well trained to give us our best running start as we hit July 5th here, which is our last reporting period possibility. So feel free, come in, download this. Also, reach out to us. We're here. We do free consultations. There's multiple service level options at different price points. And we focus on a lot of different areas. So not just MIPS, but also advanced APMs. If you need some ideas about ASC quality reporting, give us a shout. And we're happy to help. I'm not going to sell you more than what you need. So just give us a shout, and we'll work with you and figure out what would help you best. All right, so I have just waxed poetic on mid-year MIPS here. We're going to open it up for questions. And Nick has said he'll help me out here with fielding any questions that you guys had.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
I'm back in here. Yeah, thank you, Katie, so much. That was so informative and very helpful. Like, there's a lot of practical, real world advice in there. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I also want to say, in addition to sending the recording of the video recording tomorrow, we will also send a copy of that ebook.
Oh,
Because,
sweet, awesome.
So much of that data that you need from this reporting is in your EHR, and there's enough that goes into switching EHRs, but so you may lose. That may not be your primary focus when switching, but it's really important nonetheless.
Absolutely.
So we want to make sure everybody has that information they need. And so moving on to questions, please feel free to keep typing them in, either the chat or the questions. There's two options there, and GoToWebinar. We'll see either one. The first one here is about an accountable care organization. So this says, do I still have to track MIPS data if I'm part of an accountable care organization? My primary eligibility for 2024 shows that I'm part of an accountable care organization.
So good question. So we recommend tracking MIPS data just in case. With MIPS, you just want to have options. Just keep all options, all possible routes open to yourself. I know that on our team, we've had multiple instances where an accountable care organization drops a provider kind of mid-year, and then suddenly come December, when final eligibility is posted, that provider finds out that they have to report for MIPS instead. And if that catches the provider by surprise, the final score and the payment adjustment for all of 2026 could be very, very poor. So it helps to keep your, again, reporting routes open, and just, even if you're like, oh, I'm all set, just have it running in the background and monitor it as well, just to keep yourself safe.
Great, thank you. Can I report on the same improvement activity from year to year?
Good question. All right. You can, but just make sure that you're improving on a different aspect of the activity. Like as an example, um, there's a activity that's called, we call it for short 24/7 access. So it's provide 24/7 access to MIPS eligible clinicians or groups who have real-time access to patients' medical records. It's IAEPA 1. So if you're working on improving um, by seeing patients either the same day or the next day, urgent appointments for 1 year, and maybe look at a different aspect of the measure for the following year. So like the following year, you expand your hours in the evenings and weekends by creating like an on-call rotation with other groups in your area. Those are some things to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And again, please feel free to type in questions. I have one more here for you, Katie, and we'll see if we get any others.
All right, deal.
Sorry, was somebody have a question? Okay. Katie, how do I find out about my past MIPS scores?
Yes, and that's a very good thing to do. You will need a quality payment program login. So if you go to qpp.cms.gov, there is a sign-in option on the far upper right of your screen. And when you click on it, the website walks you through creating a login if you don't have one or resetting a password if you did. The passwords expire very quickly. So if you haven't been in like 45 days or so, it's going to probably require a password reset for security. But once you're logged in, you can see your past scores right now through the year 2022. Last year, 2023 scores won't post until later this summer.
Is that something when this is my own personal follow-up to that?
Yeah.
When a practice comes to the clinical quality experts team,
Yeah.
is that something that you want to take a look at? Is that kind of
Yes.
baseline information that you want to see when they come to meet with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A very good question, Nick. Because you want to see your trends. You want to see how have you been doing in order to know where to go and how you can improve from there. Some clinics have been very surprised by some past scores. So it's important for your current year score to figure out, okay, where did we go wrong last year? How can we improve?
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So I want to thank everybody again for joining. I want to thank Katie for sharing her expertise and taking the time. We
Absolutely.
understand for all of you that this is, 1 hour in your day is valuable. So taking the time to spend with us, we really appreciate. Hopefully this is valuable. And this is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the level of expertise that the clinical quality experts team has. So I do encourage, if you have any further MIPS questions, reach out to us, reach out to Katie, and consider, having that conversation with her. Katie probably gets tired of my comparison of MIPS to taxes, but the accountant can't fix your taxes at the end of the year, right? You need to plan throughout the year to get, to improve your MIPS scores. There's nothing you can do at the end of the year. It's throughout the year. So that's why we're so grateful for Katie to share information today. We did one earlier in the year. So again, this is something that's important to think about all year, and not just at the end when it's time to file. It's time to submit your data. So
Absolutely.
thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch about the next one, and you'll receive the recording along with that ebook within the next 24 hours. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thank you for joining today's webinar.